Frame relay was one of the first wide area networking standards that allowed you to bring in a single circuit into a facility but still communicate to many hundreds of different wide area network locations. In the past, we would have to put a separate line, a separate circuit into our facility for every single connection, essentially drawing a straight line from our facility to remote site 1, then have another circuit from our facility to remote site 2, and another circuit for remote site 3, and so on. With Frame Relay, we were able to get a lot of cost effectiveness because we could bring in a single circuit and now be able to communicate to multiple locations simultaneously. The way we did this was take our Ethernet connections and we'd send the traffic through and encapsulate it into this Frame Relay network. And we would tell the Frame Relay network that we would like to send this traffic to site number 3. And the Frame Relay network inside of it would have a lot of different network connections, a lot of different network switches and infrastructures. It's something that we didn't have any control of or any visibility into, something we call the cloud. And so we'd put it into the cloud, and the Frame Relay network would make sure that it came out on the other side exactly where it was destined to go. Usually the speeds for Frame Relay networks were anywhere from about 64 kilobits per second all the way up to DS3 speeds. So we might have a big connection at our corporate office, and we might have smaller connections out at all of our other locations. Usually you don't see new Frame Relay implementations these days. Frame Relay is a standard that's slowly losing to MPLS. MPLS is a much more effective and much more efficient way of communicating over a wide area network. So you usually see Frame Relay only in legacy type environments. A wide area network technology that had a lot of promise but really failed to deliver was one called ATM. This stands for Asynchronous Transfer Mode. And it was a combination of a cell-based communication and a SONET type connectivity. It was a standard set of protocols that you could send over these high-speed SONET networks. It used something called 53-byte cells, has a small little size for this data. There were 48 bytes that you could put inside of these cells, with 5 bytes that were used for the header information. And these cells would constantly go over the network, but one of the benefits of ATM is you had a constant stream of these cells. It was a standard set of communication that was going always at the same speed. Whether you were putting data into the network or not, you constantly had these 53-byte cells going over the network. So they were great for high throughput communications. If you needed real-time communication and low latency, there were these constant cells that were going over the network. ATM also allowed us to use voice, to use video, to use data, to use a lot of different types of connections and send them all through these ATM networks. It had speeds that would go up to about OC 192. So we're looking at significantly high speeds, especially for the times that we were putting in these ATM networks. Because they were taking our Ethernet frames, you're talking about a 1500 byte connection, you would have to split that now into tiny little pieces because obviously you only had 48 bytes of data in an ATM cell. And you'd have to segment it up into tiny pieces, send all of those tiny segments across the network, and reassemble all of them on the other side. There was a lot of overhead associated with that. And so you really weren't able to get speeds any higher than OC 192 because of all of this segmentation and reassembly that you would have to do of all of the data going through these ATM networks. There were a number of disadvantages associated with ATM. Most people found it to be relatively expensive. It had very high-end gear inside of it. So it was very costly to implement this on any wide scale. And it was a very complex architecture, one that you really had to study and understand exactly what was going on. All of these negatives ended up causing ATM to really not be embraced by the mainstream, and eventually it was a topology that fell by the wayside.